Number 10. Alchemax. Alchemax is the villainous corporation that exists in the alternate future of 2099, Earth 928. It is where Miguel O'Hara once worked and came up with the procedure that would ultimately grant him his powers. He was a brilliant geneticist that worked for Alchemax, but didn't like that he was being pressured to rush along his research and begin trials that he believed were unethical. When Miguel tried to leave Alchemax after a test subject died from the procedure, the CEO, Tyler Stone, attempted to prevent him from leaving by getting him addicted to a drug only Alchemax produced, called Rapture, which is also apparently a highly addictive substance, so not so great for Miguel. Fortunately, Miguel would end up curing himself, getting spider-like powers, and end up escaping Alchemax, at least for the time being. Alchemax and Stone, however, weren't willing to let him escape so easily, and they would continue to pursue him. It's possible Alchemax could end up being the main big bad of it all in Across the Spider-Verse Part 1, and maybe Part 2, and however many other parts there will be. Number 9. Vulture. While I imagine we will get to see some of Miguel O'Hara's villains as we head to the future of 2099, I would also love it if we get to meet some of Spider-Man Noir's as well. In the reality of the Noirverse, Earth 90214, Vulture is actually a terrifying villain who Spider-Man Noir also has a pretty personal vendetta against. In that reality, Vulture is the one who is personally responsible for killing Peter's Uncle Ben. He was ordered by the Green Goblin of the Noirverse to do this, but still, he was ultimately the one responsible. Vulture here is a carnival geek. That is a person who travels around with a carnival and, not having any particular skill sets of their own, usually performs by biting the heads off of live animals. Vulture went down this road and ended up with a very acquired taste for human flesh. As such, he devoured Peter's Uncle Ben. Later on, Spider-Man Noir would kill the Vulture for what he'd done, when he later attempted to kill his Aunt May. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn about more amazing multiversal villains and just, spider villains in general, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. And let us know if there's anyone in particular you want to learn more about. Number 8. The Lizard. The Lizard of Earth 65 is the version we are talking about here. On Earth 65, the same reality that Spider-Gwen hails from in the comics, Lizard is actually none other than Peter Parker. Peter Parker is best friends with Gwen Stacy, and after she becomes the spider-like superpowered hero in this reality, in his place, he wants nothing more than to be like her. He does not know, of course, that this hero, his hero, is actually his friend Gwen. Done with being bullied and having to have Gwen stick up for him as well, he creates a serum which he uses on himself. It gives him power, but it also turns him into the monster and villain known as Lizard, as his reptile self takes over. The Lizard ends up dying when he comes up against Spider-Gwen, and is only then revealed to be Peter Parker, Gwen's best friend. He dies in her arms. It's all pretty tragic. We saw an allusion to this part of Gwen and Peter's stories from Earth 65 in Gwen's origin flashback in Into the Spider-Verse. But what if Peter didn't die? What if he's still alive and he somehow returns? That would be intense for Gwen to deal with. Perhaps he's an alternate of this alternate who is still alive, or perhaps, like I said, the Lizard didn't really die in Gwen's universe. There are multiple approaches you could take here. I personally would love to see him come back because I just would love to see their dynamic. Number 7. Ultimatum. Ultimatum is actually an alternate and evil version of Miles Morales in the comics, who hails from the main continuity of Earth 616. You see, in the comics, Miles is actually not from the main continuity, not originally, but instead from an alternate universe, the universe of Earth 1610, known as the Ultimate Universe, because that was the line of comics that it was a part of. The Ultimates themselves were actually a superhero team akin to Earth 616's Avengers. On Earth 616, Miles Morales was a criminal who ended up traveling for a time to Earth 1610. When he returned home to Earth 616, he learned that Miles Morales of 1610 was also residing there. Resentful of the other Miles Morales, Spider-Man, and wanting him out of his way, he aimed to send Miles and his family back to their home reality of Earth 1610, against their will, obviously. Fortunately, Miles and his uncle, Aaron Davis, aka Prowler, who also wound up resurrected and on Earth 616, foiled the plot of Ultimatum, defeating him. At least for now. Miles is such a sweetheart in the animated Spider-Verse reality, so I'd really love to see him fight against someone who is very much his opposite. I definitely want to see Miles take on his evil version. Number 6. Peter Parker 2099. In an alternate 2099 future, not the same reality that Miguel is from, Peter Parker actually becomes the CEO of Alchemax, the villainous corporation that Spider-Man 2099 once worked for. In this reality, Peter Parker was still Spider-Man, but allowed the public to believe that the hero was dead. Retired from heroics, he became the CEO of Alchemax, working sort of in secret because, you know, he's supposed to be dead. His plan was to fix his past mistakes and bring back all of those people whom he couldn't save during his time as Spider-Man. This alternate version of Peter also has a prolonged lifespan due to fancy future anti-aging technology, so that's how he's still alive, by the way. He attempts to get Miguel from the alternate 2099 reality, which is I guess really the main 2099 reality, and his own younger self to join him, but both refuse, prompting 2099 Peter to fight Miguel. This evil version of Spider-Man I think could fit well into Across the Spider-Verse as a main antagonist, considering his whole plot involves rewriting reality, which, you know, could potentially affect and threaten the entire multiverse. 2099 Peter Parker comes from the Spider-Man video game Edge of Time, where he was revealed as the main antagonist. Or well, he ended up kind of being the main antagonist I guess at the end of the game. Also, while Edge of Time wasn't well received, and I know that, the story in general was praised. And I think the story is pretty cool, so yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Number 5. Superior Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man is a version of Spider-Man who is also Dr. Otto Octavius. Let me explain. Back in the 616 comic book continuity, Otto is basically dying and manages to trick Peter into a body swap scenario. While Peter is trapped inside Otto's failing body and dies, Otto lives on in Peter's body as Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man to be exact, because you know, this is Otto, so he's like, I'm gonna be the best Spider-Man ever. Peter would eventually return, and Otto would also go back to his usual Doc Ock appearance and his hijinks, but for a time, he was the Spider-Man of the 616 reality. He's done good and bad things before in the comics, and ended up accidentally bringing back the Inheritors after they were defeated the first time in Spider-Verse. Oops. Superior Spider-Man, while known for being a villain, is also like an anti-hero, so we could really see him in either light were he to show up in Across the Spider-Verse Part 1. But yeah, he's been a villain and a hero, so I figured I could still count him as a villain for this list. I just really want Superior Spider-Man. I think a lot of us do. Number 4. Army of Doc Ocks. Why stop at 1? Or I guess 2 Doc Ocks when we could have a whole army of them, right? I mean, there isn't just Doc Ock, Otto Octavius somewhere out there. We also have Olivia Liv, Octavius's version, and we could have Superior Spider-Man as well. There are lots of cool alternates of Otto out in the multiverse that we could meet in Across the Spider-Verse, and Doc Ock is such a powerful and interesting villain that we could have a whole army of them to face. I'm not sure what the motivation would be, or like who would ultimately be the Doc Ock in charge, the like head Doc Ock, maybe Superior, but I'm sure when all those octopi put their minds and I guess their tentacles together, they could come up with some pretty ingenious schemes. Also, I feel like now that I said put their tentacles together, I'm like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but I said it. And you know what? Sometimes you gotta be like all tentacles in and then get your mind out of the gutter. Number 3. The Spider. The Spider is one of the worst alternate versions of Spider-Man we've ever met. He is super evil and is basically a version of Peter Parker that is combined with Cletus Cassidy. This alternate version of Peter Parker has red hair and was born a sociopath, because I guess everyone that has red hair is a sociopath. I don't know. I don't understand that connection, but you know, people with red hair, apparently they have no souls. He possesses a dark sense of humor and enjoys causing pain to others. He first showed up in the Exile series and hails from Earth 15. Like Carnage on Earth 616, he revels in hurting others. He possesses a symbiote very similar to Carnage, although it is actually known as the Spider symbiote instead of the Carnage symbiote in this reality. What could be cooler than seeing Miles and the rest of the Spider Army take on an alternate and evil version of Peter Parker? Also, Let There Be Carnage did well at the box office, right? I'm pretty sure it did. So wouldn't it make sense to have some kind of version of Carnage show up here? And this is like both. It's like a Spidey and a Carnage together. Number 2. MORLUN. I'm actually a really big fan of MORLUN, even though I feel like he's not really everybody's cup of tea. He's my cup of tea. I like the fact that he's a Victorian style energy vampire from an alternate past. MORLUN feeds on the energy of spider totems, hunting them down and feeding off of them. He is extremely powerful by himself and is sometimes not even just a one energy vampire kind of deal. So sometimes if you're facing MORLUN, it's not just MORLUN you're facing. MORLUN is proven to be a hard foe to beat, especially because he rarely stays dead for long and usually shows back up to torment Spider-Man and taunt him, often threatening that he will be his end. MORLUN is also the guy who ate Spider-Man's eye that one time when he was on the brink of death, plagued by a mysterious ailment. Number 1. The Inheritors. The Inheritors are the rest of MORLUN's crew and family. They are a powerful energy vampire clan which hunt down various totems and consume them. Because, Yeah, there aren't just spider totems out there apparently. There's lots of other totems. Spider totems, by the way, if you're confused by what that means, are basically spider folks from across the multiverse who are destined to end up being connected to the spirit of the spider, either possessing powers related to spiders or some other important connection which generally gives them purpose in their life. The inheritors ended up getting control over the Master Weaver, thereby turning him into an enemy of the spider totems, even though that wasn't his intended purpose to begin with. They used the Master Weaver's knowledge and power to travel the multiverse and hunt down spider totems within it. The inheritors are generally led by Solus or Morlun, and their members have included Verna, Genix, Karn, Bora, Brix, Dora, Deimos, Malos, Mortia, Namura, and Thanos. And I probably said some of those wrong, so sorry about that. Like Morlun, they are also from the alternate reality of Earth 001. And in case you didn't know, the inheritors were kind of like the main thing when we had Spider-Verse in the comics and then Spider-Geddon, so it would make sense that they would show up at some point in these movies. Please, I would like to see it. Maybe I'm the only one? I don't know. Number 10. Doctor Doom. I love Doctor Doom, he just looks so cute, but of course this is still a Doctor Doom alternate, so I imagine they're still quite menacing. Doctor Doom is just what he sounds like, an anthropomorphic duck who also happens to have a similar appearance and attitude to Doctor Doom of Earth 616. He makes an appearance as an adversary in the first issue of Peter Porker, the Spectacular Spider-Ham. Being a cartoon version of Doctor Doom, aka Victor Von Doom, Doctor Doom also hails from the reality of Spider-Hams, Earth 8311. We also learn in his first appearance that against his own will or his own interests, Doctor Doom happens to be a well-liked rock star, becoming famous against his wishes. He was trying to create his own rock group and make money off of them, but instead he ended up in the limelight despite his protests. Number 9. Killer KRAVINOFFS. The Killer KRAVINOFFS are the grandchildren of Kraven the Hunter from the dystopian post-apocalyptic reality of Old Man Logan and Old Man Hawkeye, Earth 807128. With Kraven no longer around to hunt, in his place are his grandchildren. There are 3 of them, but only one ends up actually getting a name. Sadly, their existence in the comics is short-lived for how cool they look and should be as descendants of Kraven. They only appear in one issue of Old Man Hawkeye, showing up in issue number 4. They run into Marshall Bullseye there and actually end up getting killed by him. And friends, before we move on to the next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn about even more alternate villains, there are so many alternate Spider-Man villains I could tell you about, so be sure to hit that like button. Number 8. KARN. KARN ends up becoming the Great Weaver, an ally to the Spider Totems in the end. Spider Totems are spider-like superpowered beings who actually receive their powers through fate rather than circumstance, as we were initially led to believe with heroes like Spider-Man. KARN was a member of the Inheritors, a coven of energy vampires who feed on various animal kingdom totems such as the spider variety, Spider Totems. After KARN was blamed for the death of his mother, he was made to work to atone his misdeeds. He traveled around various multiverses hunting down spider totems at the behest of the other inheritors, though he never really enjoyed it and thus was a reluctant villain. When the previous Master Weaver ended up dead, KARN decided to take his place and instead became an ally to the Spider Army as opposed to a villain of theirs. He did however kill spider totems back when he was hunting and working for the Inheritors, and a member of the Inheritors really. Like his fellow inheritors, KARN hails from the reality of Earth 001 and Loom World, which is their home world. Number 7. KINGPIG. KINGPIG is Spider-Ham's version of Kingpin. As such, KINGPIG hails from the same reality of Earth 8311. He is, as you guessed it, one big mean pig, who also happens to be a major crime lord, like his 616 counterpart. However, while Kingpin in the comics is more into drug rings and other organized crime, KINGPIG is into smuggling cheese and running the cheese market. Now I want cheese. KINGPIG operated in secret, and despite the police trying to uncover who was behind the crimes in their town of Hakawatami, Wisconsin, KINGPIG managed to be too sneaky for them to catch. In the end, it was up to Spider-Ham to discover just who was behind all this illegal activity. We already had Kingpin show up as the villain in Into the Spider-Verse, so how funny and great would it be to see his Toon counterpart in Across the Spider-Verse? Also, I'd really like to go to Spider-Ham's reality, if we get a reality hop, which I think we're gonna get to do that. Number 6. Goblin. In the noir-verse of Earth 90214, Green Goblin's counterpart is simply known as Goblin. Here, Norman Osborn is still a ruthless villain who is the major crime boss in New York and leads his own villainous group known as the Enforcers. The Enforcers are made up of former carnival freaks who each have their own unique talents, featuring characters like the noir-verse's Vulture and Chameleon. Goblin turned to a life of crime because he was mistreated, himself being a circus freak who was ridiculed for his scaly, green, reptile-like skin. Goblin in the comics is the one who is ultimately responsible for the death of Peter Parker's Uncle Ben and for the death of Ben Urich, the reporter and Felicia Hardy's former lover in this reality. Number 5. Patton Parnell. Patton Parnell has to be one of my favorite of the evil alternate Spider-Men out there, and I think he would make a bomb villain in Across the Spider-Verse Part 1, especially if we get some kind of League of Evil Spider-Men. Patton Parnell is the alternate Spider-Man from Earth 51412. Like the Spider, who is on Part 1 of our list, Parnell also has some sociopathic tendencies and enjoys recreational activities like burning ants with a magnifying glass. He ends up becoming a Spider-Man in a more literal sense, becoming a spider-like monstrosity who is also capable of laying eggs, as his Uncle Ted, who also appears to mistreat young Patton, finds out. Rather than Patton Parnell having an origin story of fantasy and heroism, his origin is basically more like a horror story, where Patton ends up as a murderous, monstrous, spider-like villain who develops a taste for human flesh and terrorizes his next-door neighbor and crush, Sarah Jane. Number 4. Tyler Stone. We talked about OCKS, the villainous future corporation, on the Part 1 to our list, and even an alternate video game reality where Peter ends up as the man behind that corporation, but we have yet to focus on the vice president of OCKS's R&D department in the main 2099 reality of Earth 928, Tyler Stone. Tyler Stone is not only VP of Research and Development at OCKS, but also is secretly Miguel O'Hara's biological father. Tyler Stone had an affair with the wife of one of his employees, Conchata, who is Miguel's mother. Miguel doesn't learn until later on that he is the son of Stone, and ends up on the staff of OCKS, working as a brilliant geneticist for them. When he tries to leave, however, it is Stone who slips him the highly addictive drug only made by OCKS known as Rapture, to prevent him from leaving. Fortunately, Miguel manages to free himself via experimentation, which also gives him spider-like powers and abilities, becoming Spider-Man 2099. Number 3. Spider-CARNAGE. Similar to the Spider on Part 1 of our list, Spider-CARNAGE is another evil alternate version of Peter Parker, or at least he thinks he's Peter Parker. Spider-CARNAGE came into being following Miles Warren cloning Peter. In this reality, Peter lost his Uncle Ben and later also his Aunt May, which left him completely broken-hearted. His state of mind was only made worse when he was made to believe the version who had escaped Miles, dyeing his hair blonde and taking up the name Ben Reilly, might actually be the true Peter Parker, with Peter potentially being the clone. This revelation filled Peter with hatred for Ben, and would later fuel the bond he had with the Carnage symbiote, who entered into his world via an interdimensional portal during a time when Peter fought Ben. His rage and the symbiote turned him into a villain known as Spider-CARNAGE, and his plan was to destroy all realities across the multiverse. This version of Spider-CARNAGE appeared in the 90s animated Spider-Man television series. Number 2. Red Goblin. Red Goblin isn't necessarily an alternate variant considering he is the main reality 616 Norman Osborn, but Superior Spider-Man is also technically Earth 616's Otto Octavius, and I counted him last time without much complaint, so I figured we could put Red Goblin on this list and it should be fine. Red Goblin is a villain that comes from a period in Marvel Comics where a depowered Norman Osborn ended up getting his hands on the Carnage symbiote and convincing it to bond with him, with both of them bonding over how they enjoyed hurting and tormenting people. Yikes. The Carnage symbiote also helped to cure Norman Osborn of the antidote that was blocking him from using the Goblin serum to regain his previous power set. So this version comes with both the powers of Carnage and those of Green Goblin. Plus you get the brilliant and twisted minds of Norman and Carnage combined. Who doesn't want Red Goblin? He's such a cool villain. Put him in Across the Spider-Verse! Number 1. Evil Spider-Man Army. With the potential for characters like PATTON, Spider-CARNAGE, Earth 65's Lizard, Ultimatum, Superior Spider-Man, The Spider, and Peter Parker 2099 to show up, it seems plausible that we could get a whole evil Spider-Man army, or evil Spider army, in Across the Spider-Verse. I don't know about you, but I'd love to see some evil Spider-Men team up to take on the heroic Spider-Folks we've come to know and love from the previous film and beyond in the comics. I think that would be super cool. The reality is, in the multiverse, we don't even need an external threat. The threat could simply be Spider-Man himself, considering there are so many great evil possibilities that appear throughout the catalog of Marvel's multiversal realities.